impeachment witness. House Democrats say it's more evidence of obstruction. The president calls the inquiry a kangaroo court. Plus, the president invites Turkey's leader for a White House visit. It's another poke at his fellow Republicans who are furious with the president for pulling U.S. troops from Syria. And it is the president who is at the center of the impeachment inquiry. But it's the State Department where Democrats believe most of the best evidence can be found.
Mr. Secretary, why don't you instruct Ambassador Sondland on the testimony?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Will you please consider our story of your case?
And we begin the hour with the dramatic impeachment standoff. House Democrats now say they'll issue a subpoena for testimony and documents from the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. This after the White House today, at the last minute, blocked his testimony. Sondland is key to the Democrats' case that the president abused his power and held up military aid to Ukraine until it agreed to pursue his political vendetta against Joe Biden. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says blocking today's deposition, in his view, just strengthens the argument the White House is obstructing Congress from doing its job and hiding critical evidence.
We are also aware that the ambassador has text messages or emails on a personal device, which have been provided to the State Department, although we have requested those from the ambassador, and the State Department is withholding those messages as well. Those messages are also deeply relevant to this investigation and the impeachment inquiry.
In a statement, Sondland's attorney says the ambassador is, quote, profoundly disappointed, but that he had no choice. Ambassador Sondland believes strongly that he acted at all times in the best interest of the United States, and he stands ready to answer the committee's questions fully and truthfully whenever he is permitted to appear. President Trump adding his 2 cents on Twitter, of course, saying he'd love to let Sondland testify, but, quote, this is from the president, unfortunately he would be testifying before a totally compromised kangaroo court. The president adding that Sondland's text messages, in the president's view, only prove he did nothing wrong. Let's get joining us to start us off. CNN's Mano Raju live on Capitol Hill. Caitlin Collins live at the White House. Caitlin, to you first. This is a dramatic escalation of the confrontation. What happened behind the scenes at the White House to get them to decide no testimony from the ambassador?
Well, essentially, John, the White House played an instrumental role in deciding this, and I'm told by sources that administration officials were in talks until late last night discussing just how much they should be cooperating with this, whether or not they should send the ambassador up to Capitol Hill if there hasn't been this formal impeachment inquiry vote yet. That's what we're hearing behind the scenes over for the last few days over here, because they say essentially that because it's not a legitimate probe in their eyes, because Democrats haven't voted to launch a formal impeachment inquiry, that they shouldn't have to be cooperating in this way by sending people like the ambassador up to Capitol Hill. We're told the White House counsel's office consulted with the State Department before they did tell the ambassador this morning that he would not be sitting down for that scheduled deposition. And essentially what you're seeing here and what you're going to hear from Manu is that they are saying that it's worth the risk of angering these Democrats by not letting Ambassador Sondland go up to Capitol Hill. It's worth that over than letting him go and sit down and talk about what he knows. Because, of course, though he is the ambassador to the European Union, Ukraine is not in the European Union. He is someone who the president instructed to really take the lead on all of this. So he's really at the center of a lot of this controversy.
At the center of it, Caitlin Collins at the White House. Let's go to Mano on the Hill now. Mano, you just heard Caitlin. The White House argues this is a process argument. You don't have a formal impeachment inquiry, therefore we won't cooperate. The Democrats think it's a substance argument, right, that they're trying to hide something?
Yeah, and they say that there's nothing that requires them to have a vote to actually authorize an impeachment inquiry. There are political and practical reasons for them not having that vote, but at the moment they say there's no reason to do it, and they're just ultimately deciding the big question, whether to actually impeach the president, something they want to make a decision on in the coming weeks. Now, what the Democrats believe is that this effort to, what their view, obstruct these witnesses from coming forward will essentially add to that evidence of obstruction of Congress that we cited in an article of impeachment. Now, expect a subpoena to come. That was just announced moments ago by Adam Schiff and the 2 other chairmen who are part of this effort, saying that Sondland will be subpoenaed both for testimony and those documents that apparently he has, text messages and other documents that he has not yet turned over to Capitol Hill. They want that information. What will happen if he doesn't comply with that? It will probably be added to that article of impeachment. But, John, there are also several other witnesses, State Department officials who they do want to speak with, including the former ambassador to Ukraine, who's supposed to come this week. But she is still a State Department employee. It's a big question, John, whether she comes, whether others come. If they don't, what will the Democrats do? Probably cite this in an article of impeachment, but they may not get more of that evidence that they've been clamoring for, John.
Right, the White House withholding what the Democrats believe to be fact witnesses. Manu, a quick follow-up question to you. The House General Counsel is in federal court today, and he's telling a judge that he believes Congress can impeach the president for lying to the American public. Also says they want access to Mueller documents to go back as part of their impeachment case. Are they building a case that would be broader than what the Speaker has suggested in public, or is this a legal argument to try to get access to documents?
Well, recall that this court case started before this current impeachment inquiry looking into the Ukraine matter. What the Democrats are arguing in court is to get the underlying evidence to the Mueller probe. But the general counsel, Doug Letter, did say that he said, quote, I can't emphasize enough, it's not just Ukraine, that this impeachment could be much broader than Ukraine, and saying unequivocally, he was asked whether or not the president could be impeached for lying, and Letter responded to the judge, I believe so. Yes, he doesn't have to just commit a crime, according to the House General Counsel, but it appears that the Justice Department will turn over some redacted memos to Capitol Hill. The judge was not happy about that, so perhaps they'll get some information more in court, but that fight's still ongoing in court, John.
A lot of different pieces of this to keep track of. Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. Appreciate it. Caitlin at the White House as well with me in studio to share their reporting and their insights. Laura Barone-Lopez with Politico. CNN's Jeff Zeleny. Michael Bender with the Wall Street Journal, and Politico's Heather Cagle. I want to start with the White House correspondent at the table. This is a major escalation. The ambassador was home. All indications were he was going to show up. And then the White House counsel, in conjunction with the President of the United States, then deciding no.
Yeah, I think it's we have two things here. One is that it's definitely a shift in strategy here. What we saw from the White House at the start of this was to push out the unprecedented decision here to push out the transcript of the Ukraine call, which the president described at the time as him leaning into transparency. He had nothing to hide. He wanted everyone to see that. And now they are blocking a key witness in this probe, which raises additional questions about how much the White House really wants to participate here, and really kind of sheds a different light on that decision to put out the transcript, which we know now was a decision more for the president to kind of take hold of the narrative. He felt he had lost the narrative, less so about transparency. And then, I think the next thing to watch here is that is the White House is really kind of struggling with the strategy, right? I mean, the president has been asked a couple times if he was going to be, over just the last few days, if he was going to participate in this impeachment strategy. And he keeps saying, I don't know, it's up to the lawyers, punting it to the lawyers. And then the late decision last night around 12:30 to block Sondland is an indication that that this is a sort of they're piecemealing as they go here.
Well, unless they're more transparent about it, it could lead you to believe that they saw Ambassador Volker's opening statement. One would assume that they saw what Ambassador Sondland was about to say to Congress, and maybe they didn't like some of it. And why is that key? In the sense that if you look at the text messages we do have available to us, veteran diplomat Bill Taylor getting worried about what's happening. He believes that the president is holding up vital military aid to Ukraine because he wants Ukraine to announce it will investigate Joe Biden. So you have a text. This is back in September. Bill Taylor, are we now saying that security assistance in White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? Gordon Sondland, call me. Then the call takes place. A few days later, Bill Taylor, as I said on the phone, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign. Then Sondland responds after 4.5 hours. And he says, Bill, I believe you're incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. Then he goes on to say, it's time to stop texting about this. So if you take a suspicious view, you want to know what happened in those 4.5 hours. Was there consultation with the White House, or was there consultation at the State Department, or both? And why did Gordon Sondland's tone suddenly change to sound much more lawyerly than a casual conversation? If you're suspicious, that's what you want to ask, and now they don't have their witness.
Right, and another exchange in those text messages was when Sondland was talking about a, quote, deliverable from Ukraine. And that's a question that a lot of Democrats have, which is what is that deliverable that you were hoping to get in these conversations? And also with the broader picture that we have now, the conversations that Sondland had with Senator Ron Johnson, where Ron Johnson walked away with that conversation as though there was a quid pro quo, and that's why he went to Trump directly. So there's a lot of mixed messaging there. And then today, the biggest news coming out of Schiff was additional text messages from Sondland on a personal device that they consider that are relevant and that State Department is deciding to withhold.
Right, and so let's hear Schiff on that point, because here's the challenge for the Democrats. You have a pretty evenly divided public. So you need these fact witnesses. If you're going to change minds out there, you need fact witnesses to put your case forward. Here's exactly what happened to try to change minds. If the White House doesn't give them, Schiff says, we'll do it this way.
The failure to produce this witness, the failure to produce these documents, we consider yet additional strong evidence of obstruction of the constitutional functions of Congress, a co-equal branch of government.
They mean what they say, and there is a constitution, there are co-equal branches of government, but impeaching somebody for obstructing Congress as opposed to having a count of impeachment that laid out dramatic fact evidence, if you're trying to convince a skeptical public, are two very different things.
It's much more complicated. Right. And I think, the president was pretty transparent this morning when he said, of course he wants to testify. We want him to testify. How many times did we hear that during the Mueller probe? Was always going to testify, always going to sit down and talk to Bob Mueller. So the reality here is the president is driving this train. He is, made a complete shift with the help of his lawyers to essentially try and slow this down. The Trump campaign is now in charge of the response to this. So he is driving this. It's going to be tough for the chairman and for Democrats to make their argument to the public if there are no more facts that come out, I think. These text messages in the first week were pretty explosive, but if that's it, who knows? There's also supposed to be a key hearing on Friday. That also may be blocked here. So we are at the obstruction point, the collision point of this. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and the president knows the bet he's making here is that is on messaging, right? That pleading the fifth is not an admission of guilt, right? But we've seen the president use that as in fact an admission of guilt. And blocking witnesses can be used against this president politically. He's making a bet that he can turn this against Congress, this kangaroo court kind of language, to make himself seem more sympathetic.
Language that's being echoed by his Republican allies on Capitol Hill. We have some pictures you could see. Chairman Schiff came out and gave a statement. Then the president's allies, several of them, were waiting off to the side. They wanted to come in and make their statement, and they used the kangaroo court as well. It's important in the sense that the White House, we'll get to some of the polling numbers later in the program, but the White House is trying to shape the environment right now as we wait to see, number one, will these witnesses ever testify? And if so, what will they say? There's a second whistleblower about to come forward. The White House is well aware of that, and the president says he's not worried, but of course he is. So they're trying to shape public opinion before the Democrats can build a fact case.
Right, and I think the court case that you and Manu talked about earlier is central to what's happening now, in the sense that the White House is saying we don't have to cooperate with you because you haven't voted to have a formal impeachment inquiry. And Speaker Pelosi says, well, I don't have to do that. I can do what I want. We're in an impeachment inquiry if I say so. And in the court case right now, DOJ and House counsel are arguing over what constitutes an impeachment inquiry. And last I checked, the judge seems to be leaning to giving the House deference to define what their inquiry is. So
we'll see how that plays out. This is playing out in court. It's playing out in Congress. It's playing out in public opinion. We should mention the Speaker of the House is out at an event. She's going to speak momentarily. It's supposed to be about prescription drugs. We'll see if she talks about this as well. And if you have a question for anybody here on today's political stories, for anyone at the table, you can tweet us. Use the hashtag InsidePolitics. We might answer your questions at the end of the show or on our podcast. Up next, though, those new poll numbers I was just talking about. They do show some problem spots for the president. An impeachment inquiry heading into an election year puts both parties in uncharted waters. We've never done this before. At the moment, the Democrats believe the numbers are on their side, meaning public opinion. A majority of Americans support the impeachment inquiry. Focus on the word inquiry, not impeachment yet. And look how the numbers have changed. Way back in August 2018, 49% of Americans said they supported an impeachment inquiry. That number dipped to 37% in July, but now in this Washington Post Schar School poll, up 20 points from in July. 58, nearly 6 in 10 Americans say they support at least an impeachment inquiry into the president's conduct. Let's break it down a little bit. This is a little bit troubling to the president. Only 7% of Republicans supported the inquiry back in July. That's up to 28% now. Not a danger sign, but certainly something for the president to keep an eye on if support for an inquiry grows in his own party. Among independents, key as both parties have their partisan reflexes, you're fighting for the middle. Support for independents up 20 points from July. Democrats take heart in that. They believe the middle of the country supports at least proceeding with the inquiry. Let's take another look at the numbers. The Democrats, how are they handling this? 50% of Democrats approve of how the Democrats are handling the inquiry, 46% disapprove. There's the divided America, the partisan America, pretty evenly divided. But only 33% of Americans support, that's the Trump base essentially, support how the Republicans are handling this. 60%, 58% disapprove of how the Republicans are handling this. We're early in the inquiry. Both parties understand where we are heading into an election year, which is why when they come out of these meetings and they talk about the developments, they're trying to convince you. The Democrats trying to say this is the right thing to do. Republicans say it's a joke.
The American people have the right to know if the president is acting in their interests, in the nation's interests, with an eye towards our national security, and not in his narrow personal political interests.
What we see in this impeachment is a kangaroo court, and Chairman Schiff is acting like a malicious Captain Kangaroo.
Quite heard it put that way before, but this is the political debate here is in some ways as important as the substance, at least early on, as they're trying to convince the American people heading into an election year. The Democrats say stick with us, Republicans say enough. The Democrats have been out to get this president from day one.
And what virtually no Republican is doing is talking about the substance in a positive way of that initial phone call. I mean, the fact is we have learned a lot over the last couple weeks or so, but the original facts remain of that rough transcript of that call. And there are a handful of Republican senators who have spoken out against this as saying it was wrong. It doesn't necessarily hit impeachment, but it was wrong. But the vast majority are being quiet. The other House Republicans there are repeating the president's talking points. He is orchestrating this in real time. But the independents in the middle, that poll, that is something that the White House, the re-election campaign, is worried about. That's why they're doing a scorched earth campaign to make this political, to make it seem like every old debate. You never wanted Trump in here. But what's not being focused on is the new information we've received. Republicans don't want you to hear about that.
But and as it plays out, we just showed you national poll numbers. I'm going to have the same conversation we have every presidential election year. National poll numbers are helpful, but don't overinvest in them because you fight for the House, just like you fight for the president. The presidency is state by state. The House is district by district. So Republicans are focusing more on the swing districts, like Alyssa Slotkin. She won just outside of Detroit, took a district that had been a Trump district before. So Republicans say the national numbers tell you one thing, but they believe with ads like this, they can change the political climate that she represents.
Instead of fixing healthcare and lowering drug prices, Slotkin votes with the radicals for endless investigations of President Trump, wasting tax dollars. Instead of working to create more jobs, Slotkin wants more hearings.
This is what Republican pollsters and strategists are telling their candidates and the Republican elected officials. Go home and say this is all political. It's keeping us from dealing with issues that are relevant to you, like health care, like the economy, like prescription drugs.
Yes, and I mean, Pelosi and the other House Democrats know that impeachment isn't just about the Constitution. It also is a political process. That's why Pelosi was so slow to even reach the inquiry stage. And DCCC, the House campaign arm for Democrats, has been advising them to say what they need to say, to talk about this the way they need to, even if it means not fully embracing it. Now there are only a handful left of frontline, those very vulnerable Democrats that have not fully embraced the inquiry. Slotkin has, but they are encouraged to handle each of these situations as they see fit in their districts.
I want to just go back to the post poll for a second, just to show you this is America's a divided country. The House should go the additional step, vote to remove the president from office, meaning actually pass articles of impeachment. Among all registered voters, 49% say that. That's a pretty high number. Among independents, 49% say that. Only 18% of Republicans say that. So the challenge for Democrats, if you want to sell this to the entire country, is to try to get Republicans to change their mind. Challenge for the president is to keep the Republicans in your camp by calling it hyperpartisan. The president's spending a lot of money on Facebook ads. Here's one of them here. As a member of the official impeachment defense task force, you will be a leader in defending the president against these baseless and disgusting attacks. I guess it's just where we are. Anyway, but especially heading into an election year, that yes, we need to learn. What did Ambassador Sondland say? Was there a quid pro quo? The substance matters, but the politics is very loud right now.
Yeah, and I think for Democrats, they're still trying to figure out how do we continue to build this case and convince independents and maybe even Republicans to join us if the White House continues to stonewall and the interviews that we do get are all done behind the scenes. You know, how do we create those made-for-TV moments and bring people to our side? And they don't actually have an answer to it. They're still trying to figure it out.
And this impeachment probe is tailor-made for the Republican base here. I was in two sprays yesterday with the president, two meetings with the president at the White House yesterday. One, he was surrounded by every major general in the United States, and he brought up impeachment and pointed to fundraising numbers that he's had, pretty impressive fundraising numbers with Republicans off this impeachment inquiry as a sign of his support. Before that, in another White House meeting, this one was supposed to be on trade, he again brought up impeachment, and what he wanted to point to there was a poll saying that he was up 17 points with independents, which must be a sign of the reaction to this impeachment inquiry, which in fact that poll was an Investor Business Daily poll that was a matchup between he and Biden, taken before the impeachment inquiry started, and I think much more reflective of the ups and downs for Biden right now than how Trump is handling impeachment probes.
The president took a poll out of context. I'm shocked that could happen. All right, we'll continue the conversation in a minute. As we go to break, a little flashback. It was on this day back in 1998, the House of Representatives voted to begin a formal impeachment inquiry into President Clinton.
Many Democrats coming to the floor today to condemn the conduct of this president. Most just don't believe it warrants impeachment.
The yeas are 258. The nays are 176. The resolution is agreed to.
The White House rewarding Turkey's president today, even as he plans a military campaign against a critical U.S. ally. The president extending an official White House invitation to Recep Erdogan for November the 13th. That announcement comes just a day after a burst of Republican outrage over President Trump's decision to abandon the Kurds by removing remaining U.S. troops from northern Syria. That would open the door, many say, to a potential slaughter. This morning, the president tried to temper those objections. Quote, "In no way have we abandoned the Kurds," the president tweeting, along with a warning to Turkey, any, quote, "unnecessary fighting," the president says, and he will hurt Turkey's very fragile economy. Those are the president's words. It is striking in the sense of the blowback from the president's own party yesterday was fierce. They don't trust Erdogan here. And then the morning after, the president says, "Come see me at the White House."
Yeah, and there's really no, or at least articulated plan to protect the Kurds. The president was asked point blank about that yesterday, if he could guarantee their safety. His response was, "We'll see." And then he described this as a tribal war that there was no solution to, that he could not see any solution to. I will say it was one of the interesting moments yesterday with the president on this was he was asked about some of this pointed criticism coming from both parties, sort of the kind of question that he would punch back on, right? Your sort of typical counterpunch moment for Trump, but he took a step back and he said there are people on with different opinions. I respect their opinions, and I have my own.
And he went on to that point. He went on to say this is his, that this is just not worth it. In the president's view, it's not. You mentioned that you're dead on. You have the Kurds, you have the Syria situation. Russia and Iran could benefit from this. The president's just not interested anymore.
Well, we've been in Syria for a long time, and it was supposed to be a very short hit, and a hit on ISIS, but it didn't work out that way. They never left, and they've been there for many, many years. At some point, we have to bring our people back home.
He's been consistent on this, even though he has stopped. He wanted to do this in Afghanistan. He wanted to do it in Syria earlier. And in both countries, in both situations, the Republican establishment, including his own people, the Pentagon, the State Department, have pushed him, and he has not done it. Now he seems determined.
Right. He has been talked out of it. He seems determined now. He said his decision is firm. I'm not sure on the politics of this. It's that bad for the president. I think the Republican establishment here is concerned about it. Lindsey Graham, certainly others are, but I'm not sure the American people, I think he has the better argument that, it's time to come home. We are in year 18 almost of the Afghanistan conflict, of course, Iraq, everything else that has endured. So this has been a consistent position of his. I think it also allows him to change the subject, and it allows Republicans on Capitol Hill to give them something to criticize the president for while not talking about impeachment. But as for this matter itself, I think it's politically probably just fine for him.
But it also raises the question, which I think is in a lot of our reporting. It's also a question that I think the public has, which is what signal does this send to U.S. allies? Because this looks as though, I mean, it is, if the president does follow through with it, it's, as even Republicans have said, a betrayal of allies. So.
And to that point, Senator Marco Rubio, among those who are saying, Mr. President, I know you inherited a mess. I know this is a bad thing. I know it sometimes seems unworkable, but he's trying to raise the context of the price. Syria isn't about neocons or about hawks. It's about reality. The Kurds were the lead ground force against ISIS and currently hold thousands of ISIS killers in jail. Abandoning them is morally repugnant, stains our nation's reputation, and could lead to thousands of ISIS killers back on the battlefield. Senator's point being, we've already seen some evidence, U.S. officials say, of the Kurdish forces abandoning those prisons and moving their forces north because they think Turkey's about to come after them. Senator Rubio essentially saying, sorry, Mr. President, I get it, but you can't do this. It's going to make things worse.
That's where this gets into problems, is the details. And we haven't seen any details. As far as I'm aware, there are no withdrawal orders from DOD to bring these troops back. There is no plan to do that quite yet. This is the president saying kind of aspirationally what he wants to do, but not a specific plan to do it. But what he does say, to bring it back to Jeff's point, is directly compare this to, cast this as a campaign promise that he's fulfilling.
What was interesting to me, and I'm not sure how much sway Pat Robertson still has with evangelicals, but he was the founder of the Christian Coalition. He was the first person who put together the political power of evangelicals back in the late 1980s when he himself ran for president. Listen to Pat Robertson on the 700 Club last night saying, Mr. President, here and the way you treat Saudi Arabia, you're making a big mistake.
I am absolutely appalled that the United States is going to betray those democratic forces in northern Syria. President who allowed Khashoggi to be cut in pieces without any repercussions whatsoever is now allowing the Christians and the Kurds to be massacred by the Turks. And I believe, and I want to say this with great solemnity, the President of the United States is in danger of losing the mandate of heaven if he permits this to happen.
That's it. Those are pretty powerful words from, again, I don't know Pat Robertson's current sway over evangelical voters. He was an icon back in the day. That could hurt the president.
But let's remember that Trump has been in similar situations before. He's floated controversial foreign policy ideas. He's been criticized by Republicans and conservatives and sometimes evangelicals. And then little has happened in Congress, especially in the GOP-controlled Senate, to, pull him back. And sometimes he pulls back, and this time he seems pretty intent on moving forward. But the question is, will Republicans do anything through a spending bill or defense legislation to actually try to punish him and get him to, join their side?
It's powerful criticism, and I think fair criticism. But the difference here, I have to say, is financial for the president, right? He's not seeing any benefit financially for the country to protect the Kurds and be involved in the skirmish out there, while he directly said he didn't want to get involved in or take any drastic action on the Khashoggi incident because Saudi Arabia could buy so much military equipment from
as near as I know, Vice President Pence has been utterly silent on this. And this is someone who does speak to evangelicals. So I think if the president would be worried about his right flank in any respect, it would be because of this. But, it's not necessarily an argument that he embraces, but boy, powerful words there. A mandate from heaven. That is perhaps the strongest thing we've heard in a very long time against this president.
Keep an eye on that one. Up next for us, advocates for gay and transgender rights get a big moment before the Supreme Court. Deficit hawks? Hide your eyes. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the federal government spent $984 billion more than it took in fiscal 2019. That's the biggest such gap since 2012. The main drivers, the usual suspects. You see them right there on your screen, along with the $1.5 trillion in tax cuts President Trump signed into law 2 years ago. Former Vice President Joe Biden rolling out a $750 billion a year plan to help Americans pay for higher education. It guarantees 2 free years of community colleges, somewhat less ambitious than other ideas put forth by his Democratic rivals in the White House race. Biden's plan also takes aim at student loan obligations with special help for public sector workers. The Supreme Court today being asked to decide if employers can fire someone because they're gay or transgender. Justice is hearing arguments in 2 cases, one involving a transgender woman who says she lost her job at a funeral home after acknowledging her transition. 2 other cases before the court are being heard as one and involve a former skydiving instructor and a social worker who say they too lost their jobs when their employers learned their sexual orientation. CNN partners with the Human Rights Campaign to present a groundbreaking series of town halls, Equality in America 2020. joined the 20 candidates as they discuss these issues facing the LGBTQ community in a night of back-to-back town halls. That's Thursday night, starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on CNN. Up next, a key Republican senator says he wants to give Rudy Giuliani his day on Capitol Hill. Graham today promising Rudy Giuliani a spotlight on Capitol Hill to lay out his unproven allegations of corruption in Ukraine. Senator Graham says it's time for the Senate to investigate, and they'll invite the president's lawyer to testify before the Judiciary Committee. The senator goes on to say he's tired of hearing just one side of the story. And that it's time now to give voice to everything Ukraine and let the chips fall where they may, Senator Graham says. Giuliani asked if he would accept Senator Graham's offer. Tells CNN, quote, "Love Lindsey, but I'm still a lawyer and I will have to deal with privilege." I think it's a great idea. Right?
I mean, so do some of the presidential candidates' campaigns, like Kamala Harris. Her campaign says we encourage this, and Senator Dianne Feinstein also encourages it, and she's also a Democrat. So
let me read the Feinstein statement because it's fun. I welcome the opportunity to question Rudy Giuliani under oath about his role in seeking the Ukrainian government's assistance to investigate one of the president's political rivals. Democratic members have plenty of questions for Mr. Giuliani, and this would give us an opportunity to help separate fact from fiction for the American people. Not going to happen, right?
No,
it's just dream day. It's not going to happen.
That's right, for a number of reasons. One of which, we had a quote in the Wall Street Journal the other day that inside the White House, inside Trump's political orbit, the only one who likes seeing Rudy on TV right now is the president.
And to that point, watch Rudy on television. Don't expect to get facts, but you do get theater.
You did ask Ukraine to look into Joe Biden.
Of course I did. It happened in the Ukraine, and it happened with Hillary Clinton. George Soros was behind it. George Soros' company was funding it. We should bring a lawsuit on behalf of the president and several of the people in the administration, maybe even myself as a lawyer, against the members of Congress individually for violating constitutional rights, violating civil rights.
We'll take you straight to Seattle. The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi talking about the witness today. The White House blocked.
To be worthy of the Constitution that we are trying to protect from the abuses of this President of the United States. Your question is specifically about the ambassador being blocked from testifying. Now, he said through his lawyers that he's fully prepared to come to testify. There will be a subpoena issued for him to come testify.
What does this signal about the White House's response to this impeachment proceeding, that you believe they're going to try to block every single step of the way to elongate this whole process?
You use the right word, to block. And so the president is obstructing Congress from getting the facts that we need. That is an abuse of power for him to act in this way. And that is one of the reasons that we have an impeachment inquiry. So our Constitution, the genius of it is a system of checks and balances, that we would have three separate co-equal branches of the government that had a check and balance on the other. The president has said Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. No, it doesn't, Mr. President. And so his snubbing his nose at the vision of our founders, his disloyalty to the Constitution is something that we have to study, and it's just with the facts. The fact and the Constitution. That's what it's about. It's not about any other disagreement you may have with the election. But well, no, that remains to be determined. That remains to be determined. There will be a subpoena, and we'll see if they respond. Article 3 of the Nixon impeachment was refusing to honor the subpoenas of Congress. I'm not here to say what those articles will be, or if there will be articles. We're having an inquiry. We'll see where it takes us. If it takes us to that place, at that time, a determination will be made as to what they are. But we're not prejudging those.
Do you have a specific timeline for this impeachment inquiry?
No. We want it to be done carefully, not hastily, but we don't want to waste any time. And it's up to the committees as to, as the evidence unfolds, at what time is the time to just say yes or no to proceed on impeachment.
To what lengths will the House Intelligence Committee be willing to go to hide the identity of the whistleblower from even House?
Yes, or no to proceed on impeachment.
To what length will the House Intelligence Committee be willing to go to hide the identity of the whistleblower from even House Republicans?
Experience on the Intelligence Committee as a member, as the top Democrat, the job Schiff had before became chairman, and now as leader and speaker. I was there to write the laws to protect whistleblowers. There to write the laws to establish the Office of Director of National Intelligence. That's only since 2004. So I know what the purpose is, the intent of Congress. The intelligence community respects the role of whistleblowers. We all do in government, but in intelligence, protecting the whistleblower is absolutely essential so that there's no retribution or anything for speaking truth. And if a whistleblower comes forth to the Inspector General with a complaint that he deemed to be of concern, what do you say, urgent concern and credible, then it goes to the next step. And whistleblowers must be protected. That is absolutely urgent concern and incredible, then it goes to the next step. And whistleblowers.
You're listening to the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Some issues with the video and audio quality of the feeds from that live event. We apologize for that. But if you listen to the substance of her remarks there, what we could hear, very important. Number one, she says it is critical that the whistleblower be protected. House Democrats preparing to take extraordinary steps to protect the identity of the one whistleblower who has come forward. And of course, there's talk there could be a second whistleblower complaint in the days ahead. That important from the Speaker. She also said the president was disloyal to the Constitution for blocking the testimony today of his ambassador to the European Union, who was supposed to testify. At the last minute, they pulled that testimony. She also said it was an abuse of power by the president to do that, and that would be part of the impeachment inquiry. She said no firm timetable. She wanted the committees to proceed as expeditiously as possible, but no firm timetable.
Right, and she's taking the same tone she's taken from the very beginning, saying, she's not smiling, she's not giving any joy at this. She did say the president is snubbing his nose as well at the Constitution. So this is a part of her response, but her response is more muted than the president, essentially using his bully pulpit to say that this is a political fight here. So, the fact remains the same. If Republicans in the White House want to block this and there's no more information that comes out, it does complicate the Democratic opportunity to make an argument to the American people. But she's being measured and very forthright about this process, that it's not about the president. And she said again, this is not about any disagreements you have with him. Take that up at the election time. This is about the Constitution. So that's her pretty, the same message she's had since the beginning.
And two key themes that are coming from her and Schiff are that they are being treated not as a co-equal branch of government, that Trump considers the presidency above them and that they're being obstructed. And they also routinely bring up the fact that when articles were drafted against Nixon, that a key piece of that was the obstruction of Congress.
The abuse of power line is really important here because I think that she and Schiff feel like they have enough to make the case on obstruction of Congress, but there's also a lot of private unease about that being the best case that you make to the public and not being able to convince voters that he did abuse his office for political benefit.
Right, and so that's sort of where we are right now at loggerheads, in the sense that she was being asked about the White House refusal, again, done at the last minute. White House counsel telling the State Department, do not let Ambassador Sondland testify. To that point, Democrats think they can make a case the White House doesn't send documents. We're going to impeach him for obstructing Congress. That becomes a Washington conversation as opposed to your point, to the abuse of power. Did the president, and some of the text messages suggest it. We don't have all the evidence. That's why you need the witnesses. But the text messages certainly suggest that the diplomats involved, especially the veteran diplomat like Bill Taylor, who's been at this for years, career foreign service, thought, hey, wait a minute. What are you asking me to do? He said crazy in those texts to hold up security assistance to help a domestic political campaign. That would be, if they could connect all that together, that would be an abuse of power by the president. But if the White House denies the witnesses, it's hard for the Democrats to make that public case because people out in the country have skepticism, shall I say, about trusting politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, and that's what the House is trying to do, Democrats are trying to do, is get to the intent. We know what the president said, and they're trying to figure out why he said and what he meant by those words. And the president has shown sort of over the last couple of months, few months, that he's okay. He feels comfortable with the messaging battle when he's accused of obstruction and abuse of power. And that's why, to what Jeff said earlier, it's an interesting shift from Pelosi to make this not about Trump and Democrats. This is about Trump and the Constitution.
And I just want to come back again. You hear the speaker talking about the ambassador. If you're not following this closely, the White House decided this morning to not let the president's ambassador to the European Union testify. He was part of these text exchanges. If you go there, Bill Taylor, a career diplomat. Are we now saying that security assistance and White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? Gordon Sondland, call me. In later text says, let's stop texting about this. Again, there may be an explanation. But if you just look at these text messages, you think, okay, Gordon Sondland suddenly realized, let's stop texting about this, because this is a problem.
Exactly, and he's also not a longtime diplomat. He was a major campaign contributor. He's also the ambassador to the EU, and Ukraine is not involved in the EU. So one of the questions I think that would have come up today had he been there is, what was his role exactly? Was he, perhaps trying to pressure members of the EU to also withhold aid? So I think that is something that is still to be asked. But I mean, we should remember who he is. But he was here in Washington, apparently ready to testify. But the White House blocked that early this morning.
To that point, the other witness that they hope testifies Friday, but we'll see after what happened today. The State Department could say no again. Ambassador Yovanovitch, who was recalled, did the White House ask a political ally? He was a donor to the Trump campaign, to go in and manage this situation because the career people like Bill Taylor, like the ambassador, were saying, wait a minute, you're asking us to do something we're not comfortable doing.
Yeah, and our reporting at the Journal is that it was the president was the one specifically pushing this Yovanovitch's ouster, despite some reservations from state, and to the point where Rudy Giuliani had to get involved to remind the president of some of his charges about how she was handling his political interest in Ukraine.
A lot of moving parts. We appreciate your patience today, including going out to see the speaker out there again, trying to promote the Democratic policy agenda, dealing with impeachment's question as she does. That is the world we live in at the moment. Thanks for joining us Inside Politics. See you back here this time tomorrow. Don't go anywhere. A busy day. Brianna